It's Adrian Brody's first acting job in like 15 years. Let's get started. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Thumb Together. Today we're going to be talking about Succession Season 3, Episode 4, The Lion and the Meadow. Together. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. Lion and the Meadow takes a season where so far I would have told you this could not have gotten any more tense, and it makes it more tense. Because for the whole season, there's one thing that's been missing, is that we have not had Kendall and Logan share a scene together, for obvious reasons. But that could only stay a thing for so long, until finally we get them in a room together, or in this case, a beach, and hilarity ensues? First of all, before we get to the main crux of this episode, I want to touch on a couple of little things that I thought were genuinely cool. The first is that Connor is slowly but surely steamrolling his way towards running for president. I am still holding on to that. I'm still holding on to him running. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's something interesting going on here. Ever since way back in season 1, the president has been this sort of looming off-screen presence in that we know he and Logan have a relationship. We know that Logan despises him, but he uses the president for his own advantage. And we know that there's been communication constantly between the White House and Waystar. Well, it feels like this season, so far, we have had much more go-between with the company and the presidency, way more than usual. And in the promo for next week's episode, there's even more president stuff coming up where the president is calling Logan and it sounds like it's urgent. And what's interesting is they never full out explicitly say that the president in this world is Trump. By the time the show had premiered, I think that was during Trump's presidency. But if they're going the fictional world route anyway, maybe the president is just some random fictional character. And if so, I'm really interested to see who they get to play him if we ever do see him. Logan is always calling him the Raisin, so I picture someone really shriveled and really old. He could be talking about Trump. I mean, Trump does look like one of those little yellow raisins. If they are going to go with someone entirely fictional, I'm really curious who they could get. What do you think? Who could play the president on a show like Succession? I think it would be kind of fun if they got Redford to do it, even though that's a really on-the-nose Watchmen thing. It would still be neat. The other little thing I wanted to call attention to was the wonderful scene we get between Tom and Greg. Because Tom and Greg scenes are always the highlight of the show. I want a Sistine Chapel painting of nothing but Tom and Greg scenes, if we're being honest. And this scene really stuck out for me as the highlight of the episode because of just the fact that these people are morally and socially bankrupt. So when you have somebody like Tom, who has just had all of the humanity leached out of him, save for a few tiny crumbs, when you see those crumbs, they stand out. And during his trip to Greg's office this week, we saw one of those crumbs where, in his own very bizarre Tom way, he tells the story of Nero and one of Nero's servants and how Nero had the servant castrated and married him and forced him to wear a dress. And Tom looks endearingly at Greg and says, "Greg, I would castrate and marry you in a heartbeat." And it's hilarious and odd and disturbing, but that camouflages the straight up fact that this is one of the most sincere things Tom has ever said to Greg, or anybody on the show for that matter. This is him opening up. This is as far as a person like Tom can open up, and it's immediately shattered by him trying to hide it with a macho, roughhousing wrestling kind of thing, and that ends up backfiring and gives Tom a reason to act tough and to back away and throw his coat rack and storm out of the office, because that's all Tom knows, is that hyper masculine, toxic environment of corporate success. So that little moment, the moment between "I would castrate and marry you in a heartbeat" to "let's fight," heartbreaking. Heartbreaking, beautiful, human moment. Another in a long line of testaments to just how awesome Matthew McFadden is, and how I hope that this show never goes on without Tom, because Tom is he's the spine that holds this all together in a way. It just made for one of the most poignant and telling moments in the whole series. And speaking of Greg, am I alone in thinking it was a little bit odd that he made the deal to betray Kendall and go over to Logan, but we don't see him make that choice? That happens entirely off screen. I thought that was weird and it made me maybe think that everybody is lying about Greg being on board. But then again, why would they lie to each other? So I don't know. I'm curious why they would choose to leave something like that out, considering that betraying Kendall also means betraying his grandfather Ewan and the lawyer Ewan set him up with. That's what has me shaking my head. And I'm like, why would he do that? But now it's time to talk about the titular meadow or beach or, just general strange field between the water and Joshua's house. Because Joshua, Adrian Brody, is finally here. He's a billionaire who lives in a house that looks startlingly like the house from Weekend at Bernie's, and I would not be surprised if it was the same house. And Joshua is just this big old rich venture capitalist who's got tons of money poured into Waystar Royco. He might be their biggest investor, and he's getting cold feet because it is a shit show at Waystar. We do not blame him for those cold feet. In fact, we're probably thinking, hey, Adrian, your feet could stand to be a little bit colder. And it was a brilliant, beautiful move by the writers to force Kendall and Logan to not put aside their differences, but join together towards a common goal. Neither of them will benefit if Joshua pulls out. So these two have to sit there despising one another, desiring one another's defeat, while at the same time teaming up to keep Joshua's money in their ledgers. And what I really loved about Joshua was that even though they portrayed him as a somewhat decent guy, he's still yelling at his hired help, so billionaires will be billionaires, I guess. But even though they portrayed him as a guy with a bit more of a conscience than anybody at Waystar, he still has a zero tolerance for their bullshit. He feels bad about it, but he does have a zero tolerance for their bullshit. He's sitting there being as polite as possible, taking care of them, offering them food. But when they start pushing and trying to get him to stay, he just kind of shrugs and says, you know what, guys, I really don't see anything attractive about keeping my money in your company. I just don't. And it all comes to a head in quite literally a pulse-pounding scene where I was convinced for a minute Logan might actually drop dead, because it was not sounding good. We forget, as tough and robust as he is, Logan is still an 81-year-old man who suffered a stroke and is not in the best physical shape, because let's face it, corporate people usually aren't. And Joshua has been offering him food and beverage all throughout this visit, but Logan stays true to character and acts like he is above basic human necessities. Remember back in episode 1 of this season where they're sitting around the airport and Carl says, hey, should we order some food? And Logan just looks at him and says, swallow. We're running on saliva and adrenaline. That's what's happening here. He's being offered bananas and energy bars and water and seafood. And he's just like, no, I'm fine. What about a car so you don't have to walk up this crazy hill in the sun? No, I'm fine. I can do anything. And that's the problem with Logan, is he refuses to admit his humanity until his own humanity catches up to him, which is exactly what it does here. He's standing there in denial, walking through this meadow. The episode should have been called Lion in the Meadow, because he's lying. But before all this goes down, he does get in one interesting little comment about how he thinks his son is wrong, but he loves him anyway, and he may be the best of the bunch. And it's a very interesting moment that kind of drops the mic on everything and turns it all into this quiet, strange, awkward, pregnant pause. And Kendall's looking at him and he's just like, what? I believe, just based off what we know of Logan, that was kind of BS and not exactly BS. Here's what I mean by that. Yes, Kendall doing what Kendall did proved he has the killer instinct, which makes him the closest to Logan out of the 4 kids. And Logan recognizes that and knows that that's what he wants for the future of his company. He doesn't want somebody to bring it into the next millennium and change things like Shiv. He doesn't want a psycho like Roman, and he doesn't want what he considers a weakling like Greg or Connor. He wants Logan 2.0, and right now the closest thing to that is Kendall Roy. But it's also BS because at the end of the day, Logan is a bully, and he is proud that his son became a bully. He just wants his son to stop bullying him, because that's how bullies work. They're cowards. So as Obi-Wan Kenobi would say, what Logan said there was true from a certain point of view. But all in all, that made for a tornado of an episode of Succession. So let me know in the comments what you thought of Lion in the Meadow. Is the president going to come on screen? Was Logan lying or was he not lying? Is Logan going to be okay? I'll see you here next week to talk about episode 5. Until then, my friends, adios.